In 2013, I coined the name Grampian, and I gave it to your host, Jim Tracy.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Grampian. This is the podcast where Grandpa, that's me, chats with champions. And today we're going to be talking with Aaron Larsen. And Aaron, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but I got to tell you, he is the guy who makes me proud to be a grandpa. And he's elevated my status both amongst my grandkids and my peers by elevating the position that grandparents occupy. But first, I'd like to get to know you. Aaron, welcome to the Grampian.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. It's such an honor just to be on your show. And I love what you're doing and kind of season that mantle as we head into this next chapter of what grandparenting looks like nowadays, which is totally different than what it used to be. So
it is totally different, but it's really it's different, better, and different, more the same, isn't it?
Right. It is.
Because our responsibilities haven't tailed off.
Right. You know, that's the thing is grandparents, we tend to be living longer. So there's the longevity element to it, which provides more opportunity. Right. And then the other part really that I found that's so different is just the way that technology has evolved and allowed us to now connect with our families at any point. I mean, we have so many devices and apps. Anyone can really connect with any of their families. So it's a matter of, how intentional are we in doing so, right?
All right. Well, before we dive off that cliff, I want folks to know the champion that I know, whose name is Aaron Larsen. Tell us a little bit about the person. Who are you, man?
Oh, wow. Well, thanks. I'll just say I am a father. I have two young little girls. I'm so proud to be a father. I'm a husband to a beautiful wife. I'm a grateful grandson. I've been blessed with some amazing grandparents in my life, and we'll talk more about them later. And then I would just say I'm an entrepreneur. I founded a company that's based upon what I believe is more than a passion, but more of a calling. So I'll stop there because I don't want to talk too much about myself.
All right, but you haven't done just one business. You've done multiples, and you've got success kind of written all over you. But tell the folks, because this is now a worldwide show. So tell us where in the world you're from.
Yeah, so I have been living in Oregon all my life. I mean, except for a study abroad to Costa Rica for about 4 months. I've been living in Oregon basically, and I now live in Roseburg, Oregon. And I went to school and a college at Linfield College, which is now Linfield University. It continues to grow, which I'm very thankful about.
Yeah.
That's pretty much that's where I'm located and a little bit more about me. So.
All right. Sounds good. So you've done some really weird, crazy, cool things in your past. Everybody knows what TEDx is, right? Everybody knows what TED Talks are. They've got 70 million gazillion views on blah, 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 YouTube, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they give this ideas we're spreading away, but not many people know that there's people behind this organization who actually are the ones who make it happen. The speakers are the guys, gals who just show up. I just happened to be there on the red carpet that day, and they took this wonderful video of me, but there's some preparation that goes into that. There's planning that goes into it. There's what that goes into it, because you're a TED organizer.
Yeah, so there is a lot that goes into organizing TEDx events, and I will say that I give all the credit to my lovely wife Andre because she's the one who really felt called to organize a TEDx event in our community in Roseburg, small community.
Yeah.
I'll give you a little bit of the backstory. What happened was there was a tragedy in our town at Umpqua Community College. There was a mass shooting, and what happened was in our small town, what we saw, we felt like there was a lot of national media that came in and there was like all this attention being paid to this tragedy that had happened. We didn't feel like it was, it really reflected who we were as a community. And what we saw living in the community, we saw a lot of people pulling together and supporting each other and doing some amazing positive things. And
different picture, huh?
A completely different picture. And so my wife, Andre, she felt inspired to organize a TEDx event because she'd always loved TED Talks. And she thought,
Mhm.
why don't we feature some of these local folks who may have not ever even traveled outside of Roseburg, but they're
Yeah.
doing amazing things. And let's put them on a global platform. Let's shine a light and elevate them. So that was the inspiration for organizing our first event. And then we did a second event afterwards. So I've had the pleasure of being an organizer with my wife, and then also being the speaker, chair, and just a coach when it comes to
Wow.
preparing the speakers as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's almost a TED Talk in Excel in itself. I'm inspired, frankly, by your wife being driven to action. I love people with a bias for action who are driven to that by something completely outside of their circle of influence. They just take it and turn it to good. So kudos to Andre. She is also a champion.
She is. She certainly is.
All
Thank you.
right. All right. So from TEDx and your business career, you felt compelled, I guess. I'm going to use that word, but you felt compelled to launch a new career slash business slash platform. Tell us about it.
Yes. Yes, yes. So, Grandparents Academy is something that started really a long time ago. It started back in 2011, and I was living with my grandparents at the time. In fact, I had graduated in 2008 from college, and I was magna cum laude, but I was also jobless at the time. I like to say magna cum jobless, and it was just right when the Great Recession happened, and quite honestly, I was just trying to figure out what to do next. I had this mountain of debt, and no, by no fault of like the college. I had a wonderful college experience and wonderful professors and all of that, but the world like really just kind of went off the cliff in 2008, and I
Yeah.
was trying to figure things out. So I sought refuge, found a temporary position. Fortunately, through the connections through my college, it's interesting when you look back and you connect the dots, Jim. But some alumni, I had skipped nutrition class to go learn how to make music videos and learn how to do video editing and all these things with these really cool alumni uh, during my college years. And so I accumulated these skills. I never took any classes, just accumulated the skills. And they happened to have a connection who needed, and this is actually not so much related to the video skills, but I will get to that in a second, who was connected in the political space. And I ended up being
Uh-huh.
a campaign manager for a statewide race for Secretary of State. And I was
Wow.
way over my head. Like I had no idea what I was doing. But I found I apparently interviewed well. I got the position. I learned a lot, and I sought refuge living with my grandma. I knew it was a temporary position, and still I had a lot of bills to pay. So
Yeah.
I lived with my grandma, and she was 80 years old at the time, and that ended up being a life changing experience.
Yeah. And grandma's name was
My grandma, I call her Grandma Grace. Yeah,
Grandma Grace. Wow.
yeah.
That's very cool. So, you know what they say, if you're not over your skis, you're probably not going downhill. So, you were moving downhill at a breakneck pace. Now you're fresh out of college, you're still wet behind the ears and green as grass, and you're running a statewide race for Attorney General,
Secretary of State. So, in
Secretary of
which
State.
also serves as lieutenant governor if something happened in Oregon, if
Oh
something
wow.
happened to the governor. So
Oh, so this is a kind of a big.
yeah,
So it's not just Secretary of State. This is also Lieutenant Governor,
right.
Governor to be, if you will, if
Governor
anything
to
bad
be, right.
happens. Wow,
Yes.
that really is a big deal.
So it was oh, again, I was way over my skis, but what was interesting during that time was I was still, like I said, trying to find myself. And I remember coming home one time, I was so frustrated because blogging had just come about and it was really influencing the public opinion in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
Any Joe Blow could write anything on the internet, and all of a sudden,
Had
would
to be
get
true.
votes
I
for
read
it.
it on the
Right.
internet, right?
So
Yeah.
I would vent about. I came in frustrated. My grandma, she was sitting there on the couch, and she was watching. I think it was Golden Girls at the time, and she's just like, "Oh, come sit down, honey. Tell me about your day." Sitting with her, and I vented, told her all of these things that went wrong that day, and this person said that, And she just patiently listened and listened. And then I finally said, something to the tune of, yeah, so, what am I supposed to do about all this stuff? And she just says, well, Aaron, I understand. I've been through some things in my life. And then she started to tell me about, living through the Great Depression and
Wow.
getting cancer at 29 and not being able to have kids, and then adopting four
Ah.
kids. And then I got to see her care for my grandpa, who was my hero, who had ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease, and I just she was able to put this into perspective, and I think that was the biggest thing is uh, I was blessed to have someone in my life at the right time who would be there to listen and then really remind me what was important in life.
Wow, what lessons that she gave you. What a gift.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I taught her how to Facebook, which was pretty cool. I mean, she did that until the day she died. She lived to be over 95, which was a real
Oh,
blessing.
wow.
But she would leave us comments all the time, and that was her way of connecting with her family from a distance. She was quite an inspiration.
Nice, nice. So, the what, I guess, the what is Grandparents Academy. The who is Grandma Grace.
Yeah.
The why is kind of like what compelled you to like launch this as a business.
Yeah. So after living with grandma for a year, I
Excuse
felt
me.
like I had kind of found my purpose again, that I found myself, and that I wanted to do more. And so I moved in with my granny Grit and my grandpa Grit because grandpa had a stroke, and I always wanted to get back out into the country in Roseburg and spend more time there. So I moved in with them to help out, be a caregiver for my grandpa. And I also
Hmm.
found a job, and this is where the video skills come in. I found a job as a commercial TV producer at a local TV station that just happened to be hiring. So that's all these skills. Just it couldn't wrote a better story. It all connected. So that allowed me to be there with them, and I learned all sorts of lessons from them, including
Very
how to
cool.
garden and resilience. Well, when Grandpa, and this is where Grandpa's Grandparents Academy comes in.
So this is
When
a separate grandma and grandpa.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
I
this is now the second tour of
yeah.
Grandparents Academy, and you're living it. You're not like producing it. You are actually the object of their education.
Oh yeah, and in this case, I'm out fixing the electric fences with Granny Grid, and we're running power tools, and we're doing all hauling hay and all sorts of stuff. So this is like totally different experience. I call it my grad school years, the 4 years. A lot of my peers went to grad school or got a
Yeah.
PhD. I went to grad school, and that was my
Hey,
story.
that's a great school, man. That's old school.
Totally.
It's
So
like my
grandpa,
PhD years. That's a post hole digger.
right? Exactly. So I got to be there for Grandpa like during his last year, and that's right where
Mm.
Grandparents Academy really launched after he passed. And I kind of got into reflection mode, and I thought, wow, life is really short, is one
Mm.
thing, and if we're given so much time on this earth, I want to make sure as I'm trying to navigate the rest of my life, I want to do something that matters, that can really make a difference. And I started to think about my unique experiences, where I was most passionate, and where my skills were. And so I created a website for grandparents because I always loved grandparents. I had this just amazing past few years living with grandparents. And I thought, well, let's create a website where it helps grandparents have this sort of unique relationship that I had experienced with my own grandparents by teaching them skills with social media and other things. And it just really evolved from there. It really was the first online academy for grandparents worldwide.
Wow, that's amazingly cool. One of the things that people generally don't understand is the first time you're going to be a parent, guess what? You've never been a parent before. Well, the same
Yeah.
thing holds true for grandparents. Especially today as we enter a era of multi generational households and things like that. That's really a return to the roots, but none of us have ever done any of this before. And you add into that remote grandparenting and estranged grandparenting because of the high divorce rates and things like that are in our country now. You're really providing a service. So we got the why, and now we got the who kind of bit, and now I want to talk about the how. How did you come up with Grandparents Academy, and how did you start to tag together? I mean, there's literally a legion of people who are following you and the Grandparents Academy online. We're right on the heels of Grandparents Week. You're like a rock star all over the country. But I want to know about the how. You said I'm going to launch this thing, and you got to do it on the web because that's only we're going to connect all both coasts, right?
Mhm.
What did
Yeah.
that look like?
Well, it was a lot of hours spent in grandma's basement learning how to create a website, learning how to use WordPress, learning how to video edit, learning how to create certain PDF guides. It's just a lot of learning, and it was. This has all been. This is all bootstrapped. This is all very much a passion project, which I think is a big reason why it's taken. Like I said, I started in 2011. This is
Yeah.
12 years ago. It's taken a long
Wow.
time to gain some traction here. And I
Yeah.
think that part of it is it's bootstrapping it and learning, but part of it is a cultural thing. I think what we're experiencing now, especially as a result of the pandemic, I think one, the pandemic taught us that it reminded us how important family is,
Hmm.
and for us to stay connected. And I
Yeah.
think the other great, the great takeaway from the pandemic is that there are these tech tools out there that we can use to connect intentionally if we use them
Yeah.
intentionally. And it spurred more innovation in that realm. And we're seeing that more and more. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and we're kind of right before, I think, a big change in the tide when it comes to grandparenting as a topic. I think there's going to be the great awakening for grandparents when they realize the potential that they truly have in their families, and how needed and necessary it is.
That's one of the reasons that you and I first hooked up is I did another podcast and I talked about my grandpa and how influential that
Yeah.
the role that he played in my own life when I was when I was very young, and how it had impacted me across the long term. And then you picked that up and ran with it, and then all of a sudden you're like calling me and you're like going, "Hey man, maybe you could talk about that on." But I went to your website and I'm looking at it. I'm like, hey, I don't want to just be a contributor. I want to be a customer. It really drove me to that. And then I look at Grandparents Week, which we're just on the heels of. How many influencers did you put out there across
Yeah.
Grandparents Week?
Yeah, so we had our first year was last year. We had about 600 attendees. This year, we had close to 4,000 attendees, so over
Wow.
500% increase just in attendees. And I think the biggest thing was we had a lot more presenters. So we had over 20 presenters, including yourself,
Okay.
Jim, experts who have different perspectives, but can kind of fill in what does grandparenting look like, and
Yeah.
how can it look like for you as you're developing that. And then we also had some key partners like Rhodes Scholar and some other organizations who linked arms with us because they realized the importance of that relationship. So I think that was a big help this year, was just realizing that there are organizations out there who are really passionate about this,
Yeah.
and we do better when we all collaborate and we link arms.
Yeah. So you had presenters up, but you had different presenters every day. I mean, you don't want
Yeah.
to leave people thinking that I was the only girl you brought to the dance. I mean, I looked at that and there was like the whole schedule was built out. I mean, they didn't even see me until Friday.
Yeah, there were all over 30 presentations, including mini classes throughout this
Wow.
week, and it was phenomenal. I've been getting rave reviews right now. So this is, like you said, on the heels of the time of this recording. I have a flood of emails I'm responding to grandparents who just thought it was amazing and they'd never seen anything like it, because there
Yeah.
really isn't anything like this virtual celebration for grandparents out there. So it is cool to
Yeah.
see.
And your focus really is on training grandparents to do what they already know how to do, but just to transfer that on a technological level. Am I kind of
Well,
getting
I,
that
I
right?
Sort of. I think that I think there's what I'd like grandparents to realize is that one, they're needed now more than ever. I think that's a
Mm,
big one. And then the second one is, even if you look at anything worthwhile in your life, you wanted to become so and so in your career, you wanted to advance and get promoted, you wanted to become a better parent, all those things in your life where you made a big impact. That took some. You invested in your own education, and you got some books. You took some classes. What I want grandparents to realize is that they're entering territory that their own grandparents, the world was different then. And their parents, when they were grandparents, the world was different then. It's a whole new world. And I
certainly.
think for grandparents to really embrace that role and to make the biggest impact in the lives of their grandchildren, it's time to really embrace that role and invest in themselves to learn what's new and how can I better connect and how can I grow a legacy that thrives beyond me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned legacy and you hit me right where I live. We named our company Legacy. But you talk about, even on your website, you talk about growing legacies. So when you're talking about growing something, this is not instantaneous. Hey, I just grew it. This is starts with a seed.
Yeah, yeah, Jim. I think that's one of the things when I was really attracted to what you stand for and what you do is when I learned that your company was named Legacy. I'm like, I got to get to know this guy because he gets it, right? And then I learned about your grandpa, and I'm like, he really gets it. So yeah, getting into legacy, I think that's the biggest thing. When tend to think about legacy, a lot of people think about inheritance, and they think about the stuff. And what I want to help
Mm.
people shift their mindset to is going from stuff to significance. In that, it doesn't matter what stuff you've accumulated over your life. It's not what you've owned; it's what you've grown. And I
Yeah.
believe that legacy cultivation, it really is a process of cultivation that requires intention. And that comes back to living with my granny Grit and her teaching me how to garden. And I just kept thinking during that process of starting from the seeds in a greenhouse and what it takes to actually get to the point to where we're harvesting the tomatoes and we're making this incredible salsa that we make together every year. I call that legacy gardening because I realize that there's a lot of similarities between growing plants and growing people. That
Yeah.
it's not instantaneous. It takes time. And sometimes the seeds you plant, you might never, ever see them sprout above the ground. But
Right
you
on.
plant them anyway because you know what you're doing is right. And every once in a while, you do see them sprout and they grow and they bloom, and it's the most incredible fulfillment that I believe you can ever experience in your life is seeing that.
Kind of the fruit.
The fruit.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The fruits of our
Hmm.
labor, and doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. There's
Hmm.
never a bad time to have a grandchild watch that happen in their life, whether it be on an electronic or an in-person basis. So I salute you for that, man. That's awesome. So I don't want to put any pressure on you. So take me out of the equation. Tell me about one of your favorite grandparent influencers that you had that was on the air this last week during Grandparents Week on Grandparents. And by the way, folks, full
Yeah.
disclosure, grandparentsacademy.com is a sponsor of the Grampian podcast. So we thank you get to thank the actual guy right now. So thank you for that, Aaron. And but the reason that we are is because we were a customer before we were sponsored by them. And we have a deep appreciation of it. But anyway, commercials over. Aaron, tell me about someone who was on Grandparents Week on grandparentsacademy.com who you just like were like wowed by.
Yeah. I'm gonna give you two really quick. So first, I would say,
Don't go quick, man. We're on a
all right,
podcast. People got all the
okay, good.
week.
All right. Well, the first I would say would be Linda and Richard Iyer. I think these two have been around for a long time in the parenting space, traveling in the world, teaching parents how to cultivate values in their families.
Mm-hmm.
And now they've transitioned. They're now grandparents. They have over 30 grandkids all over the world, and they're applying what they've learned and even evolving what they've learned to serve grandparents. And full disclosure, they are teaching a masterclass for Grandparents Academy in the fall, but they've developed this approach called teen grandparenting, and it's an acronym that stands for the different roles that grandparents can play, being the trunk, being the ear, being the assembler, and being the match. And they've identified these as the most difference making roles that grandparents can really embrace as they're serving their families. And I love their approach. And I think it was really eye opening just to hear their own experiences that they've lived. Like they've actually put these practices into place with their grandchildren. They have these traditions and routines they've created, and I thought it was very insightful.
So cool. So
So
break that down for us a little more. Trunk. What does trunk stand for?
yeah, trunk is like you're the strength, the main connection to the family's past, and making sure that they understand their heritage and the important stories
Yeah.
that you've had in your family. So being the
And you're
trunk as
connecting
the
those
lives.
to the little buds on the top of the tree at springtime that are just coming out, and they're going to be a piece of fruit or a flower or a leaf or something like that. And so then E was what?
E is the ear, and
The
ear.
ear.
This emphasizes the importance of being a listener and first seeking to understand the parents themselves as they're leading their family, that their children, your grandchildren, understanding the importance of listening and learning how your role can best support that family in sort of a three-generation approach.
Wow. Very cool. Sarah and I pick a word every year or a phrase, in this case, a phrase, every year that we want to really work on as a couple. And this year's phrase is generous listener. We want to
Hmm.
try and strive to become generous listeners. So that's a part of a talk coming towards you someday. And so then you get to A. What was A again?
The assembler. And assembler is
Assembler.
bringing everyone together, making sure that no one's left out, having those family reunions or those gatherings that so often get dismissed, or they just don't happen because no one's taken the lead in the family. So really stepping up in that role, and they mention it doesn't mean you have to organize every one of them every year, but be a leader in sort of instigating that and initiating that and helping to determine who chairs the family reunion this year and supporting that. So
Oh, that's
that's one
super
example of the
cool.
assembler.
That's super cool. I kind of feel like an assembler because my brothers, I have six brothers and a sister, and all of us are getting together. We're going to do a cruise this year. And I was kind of the instigator of it. So I'm acting like the assembler because we said to each other, I said, hey, let's get together. I want to see you before I actually have to carry your casket. And that's what that's the
Yeah.
age that grandparents are facing these days. So then you come to M. And what was M?
And the M is the match, and the match
Mm.
is like you're lighting a fire match, that type of match. So
Oh,
you're starting
a
something.
spark.
You're the spark, and they talk a lot about how this applies to finances, and in particular, when we think about how do you financially support grandchildren, what are the ways to do that? Because it differs. The appropriate way to do that differs between families, right? In
Hmm.
terms of
For
there are
sure.
some parents might not want you involved financially at all. Others might really use the help. But how
Hmm.
do you go about, especially if you have the means yourself, how do you go about being a match and supporting them financially without the negative effects of entitlement or encouraging that to
Yeah.
kind of grow in their lives, right? So they have some really interesting strategies, I believe, that can help you be there for them without that entitlement.
And I don't know any couple who doesn't need some coaching in that arena. It's really fascinating to me that they've kind of coupled those together, and it's kind of soup to nuts approach. Sounds interesting. And they were a presenter or an influencer. I like to call them the grand influencer on
Hmm.
Grandparents Academy during Grandparents Week. That's
Absolutely. Yep.
super. That's awesome. And you're going to have them again on what?
Yeah, so they are guest faculty members now of grandparentsacademy.com starting this fall. So we're so pleased to have them as faculty members, and they will be teaching a masterclass series. This will be 5 live Zoom sessions right before Thanksgiving, so a couple weeks before in November.
Sweet deal.
So you not only get to hear what they have to say, but you get to be there live and ask questions, which is incredibly valuable for
Yeah.
these two. Yeah,
Well, you keep bringing these smart people so people like me can keep coming online and learning from them. But in the
yeah.
meantime, you said you had two. And so we're
Oh
waiting for the
yes,
second person or people who influenced folks and influenced you on Grandparents Week on Grandparents Academy.
yeah. And I'll just say this, especially for those who don't get mentioned that were part of the program, they are incredibly valuable. So if you don't get a chance to see the full lineup, be sure to check that out at our website. You get to see who's there, and you can look them up and find them, because there's some
Yeah.
incredible influencers. But I would have to say Dr. Carrie Byrne, who teaches about long distance grandparenting. And she
Yeah.
presented on grandparenting from a distance, and most grandparents are long distance grandparents. They have
Hmm.
grandchildren at least a couple hundred miles away. And now, like I said earlier, there's this big opportunity with the technology that we have where grandparents, you don't have to take a back seat. In fact, that you shouldn't take a back seat. Your grandchildren really need you in your lives, even if you live in a
Exactly.
geographic distance. And so she is brilliant. She is so creative, and she has so many strategies and helpful activities for grandparents who find themselves in that situation. So in our interview, she covered several, but she is also a faculty member for Grandparents Academy, and she teaches a self-paced grandparenting from a distance course. It's available now that anyone can take. And I'll tell you what she provides. She goes above and beyond in the value that she provides, and it is life changing stuff. So
Right.
definitely want to
Right
look
on.
at that.
So give us an example. Give a, yeah, I mean, one of those obviously like it hit you pretty hard or pierced your heart even. What was that?
Well, I would say what I love about Carrie is she comes up with all sorts of creative activities, but one of them was she talked about being kind of an anthropologist, or I think she calls it a grandologist, where it's like grandparents shouldn't assume, just like in business when we talk about marketing, we're like, okay, well, know your customer, right? Well, and the same
Yeah.
thing with grandparents. It's like, don't assume that you know everything about this 5-year old or this 12-year old or how teenagers are these days. But
For
really,
sure.
she helps provide these question prompts and interviews, these surveys to really help grandparents understand what it is that their grandchild is actually passionate about, and what are they interested in, and what are their challenges, and other things, so that they have the opportunity then to make a bigger impact, because they can start to interact with them in a way that helps to further their goals, or capture their interest from a distance, or even when they have a chance to be in person, like have those experiences where they can create those meaningful and lasting memories, right? And that legacy.
Right on. Right on. Well, Aaron, you have done a marvelous thing for grandparents, not only during Grandparents Week, but through Grandparents Academy. And folks, again, it's grandparentsacademy.com. And I would just like to say thank you for bringing grandparents to the forefront, because grandparenting is the coolest job ever. But like any job, you want to be really great at it. You don't want to like, I mean, you got one foot in a banana peel and the other foot in the grave already. So you might as well do an awesome job. You don't want to get to that place and go, I was really a above average grandparent. You want to be a frankly, you want to be a great, awesome grandparent. So thank you for helping folks do that. That's one of the things that makes you a champion. Any parting words for our audience, bud?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. I love what you're doing, and for all the Grampians who are listening in, Jim said something profound when I interviewed him for Grandparents Week, and it was talking about legacy. And I just want to emphasize that legacy really isn't about that stuff, or necessarily even the memories that you create, but it's how that your grandchildren and those around you, how it's changed them. How do they interact after you're gone? What, in other words, what have you grown in them that keeps growing and helps them thrive? And Jim said that way more articulately than I did. But that's
Probably
the essence
not.
of it. That's the essence of it, is that legacy isn't, it might not be what you think, and that anyone can do it if you're intentional.
All right. Well, folks, thanks for joining us on the Grampian again. And remember, you too can be a champion just like Aaron. This is Jim, and I am out. When you get an opportunity, subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcast.